Alright, welcome to Art with Ian. Today we are talking about materials. I've got a couple materials set out here that I want to take a look at. Now, I find in my work a lot of times fabric, stone, and things like stone and metals come up. Especially when you think about, like, if you're doing fantasy paintings, you might have a bunch of rocks in the environment. You might have fabric on, your character. Maybe they have armor, metal. Fabric and metal in the same outfit potentially. So I thought these were three materials that come up a lot in my work, and I assume probably a lot in your work as well. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at how I think about rendering these. And then at the end of the video, I'll do a quick demo. Probably do a demo rendering this metal. So I'll just turn off the layers that I have now and just start fresh, and so you can kind of see my process. But before we do that, let's go ahead and look at this cloak. So I have a couple different techniques as far as how I like to handle materials, or the textures of materials. Also, you want to be thinking about how a specific material interacts with light. So fabric is soft and it absorbs light. So these are all three of these are rendered assuming the same exact top-down kind of white sunlight type of light source, right? So you can see that in the same lighting setup, we've got the metal is getting a bunch of hot light, whereas this fabric is not. If I were to start putting hot spots on this fabric, it wouldn't look like fabric anymore. It would look like, well, it might look like fabric, but it would be more like silk or leather or something that's hard surfaced, right? So if I turn off these layers, let's just look at them one at a time here. So the first thing I did was I just painted the cloak with basic light and shadow, and you can see how it works as a form. The form of it works, but it doesn't really look like fabric. It just looks, maybe certain types of fabric might have very little texture, so it kind of might pass a little bit. But so what I did was, for my first texture pass, I used light, and I set this to overlay, so it would maintain all of. See, this is what it looks like with a normal mode. So I used overlay, and what I did is I grabbed a texture brush. Now, any texture brush that you think works for you go ahead and use. That's going to be kind of something you have to choose for yourself. But this texture brush, for me, I like it a lot. It works really well. So I grabbed a texture brush and I just hit this with that texture. Then I did another pass up here at the top where the actual top-down light is hitting hard at the shoulders and the hood, top of the hood. Then I did a shadow pass. Now, what's really important to note here is that the shadow pass is staged where I duplicated my light to turn it into a shadow, and then what I did is I transformed, and I used the free transform option, and I just used the arrow keys to move it up slightly. What that created was the illusion of shadow at the top and light catching at the bottom, since we have top-down light. So if I were to move this down, you can see how that illusion goes away. And I can start to recreate the illusion from the other way. Because it's identical to the original texture I made, everything lines up, and it creates a very nice, believable tactile feeling of texture. And then for my second shadow, I just got in there, did some extra kind of reinforcements of like this curling into the center, and got into here. And this was all just painted separately from the other two, no copying or anything like that. So that is how we handled that. Okay, so that's the cloak. Now, another method that I like to use is painting everything, no multiply, no overlay, no, just all painting with regular modes on the normal mode. So let's go ahead and look at this rock and go from the beginning. So I started with the shape, just a silhouette, which is exactly what I did with this one as well. Just started with a silhouette, and the first thing I did was add color texture. So I'm using texture brushes, and again, you're gonna have to choose the textures that you like, but materials, in order to create the feeling of a material, you need to understand how it interacts with the light, and also the types of textures that we're used to seeing on that material. So be sure to find your texture brushes that you like. You'll see the brushes I use in action when I do the demo here shortly. So I won't waste too much time talking about that for now. Okay, so then you can see also the color. Rocks have varieties of colors in them. So I've got a little bit of blue, a little bit of lavender, a little bit of green, and that variety as a base is a nice way to get started with something that's going to feel more interesting than just a very plain flat gray or brown or whatever. So then I got into first run of details, and this is where I'm just thinking about the forms and trying to develop those forms, also constantly thinking about the fact that I have a top-down light. Choosing your light direction before you start rendering is extremely important. You need to understand where the light is coming from and how strong that light is, as well as the material you're hitting with that light, in order to start creating believable renderings. So detail 1, when I kind of started feeling like I'm happy with where that's going and I want to try something new without destroying it, I created a new layer, detail 2. This is where I started coming in with the light, and instead of continuing on with shadow, I started reinforcing those shadows by changing the value the opposite direction and introducing light. And I knew that light was going to be striking here and here, and so I started to work that in. And then lastly, the last line of details, where I just started to try and refine my ideas and bring the contrast up to make it feel like it's not flat. So you've got areas of really deep shadow right next to areas of the brightest light, which is typically how things work. If you have an area catching bright light, there's almost always going to be an area of dark shadow right next to it, which is because light is striking something is going to, whatever is near that, whatever it's hitting, that piece is going to cast shadow the most bold on anything nearby. So that's the rock. And so that is rendering with just normal modes, no multiply, no overlay, none of that stuff. And the goblet, I used both of these techniques. The technique from the first one and the technique from the second one are both applied to rendering this goblet. So let's look at this now. So with metal is a very hard surface. The rock, by the way, is a hard surface, but it's still not like, well, some rocks can get very shiny and become, especially if you polish them. But because there's so much breakup of the surface, you don't get necessarily super strong light. I could have pushed the light a little harder on this and gotten away with it, and it would have been fine. But I thought that was okay. Anyways, metal is a hard surface that is polished, or most of the time. In this case, this is gold. It's very soft metal as far as metals go, but it's still far harder than fabric. It's hard enough to catch when it's polished to catch a lot of light and be very shiny. But I wanted this goblet to feel old. I wanted it to feel handmade. And in the process of being made by hand, it's got scratches, it's got dings, it's got dents. Someone actually had to craft this, make a mold for it, or use a ping hammer, right? And so I'm thinking about the imperfections as much as I'm thinking about anything else as I work on rendering the material to make it feel believable. So let's go ahead and turn everything off and go through them one at a time. Okay, so this is where I started, with just choosing a local color. And in case you don't know what local color is the color of something without shadow or light. Without light or shadow, really, because light is the reason for shadow. Okay, so first thing I did, and you'll start to notice a trend here, is just lay some texture in, right? Some variety of color and texture. This is still local. This is just the texture that's inherent to the metal itself. Okay, the next thing I come with is shadow. My first pass of shadow. This is where I start to really establish the form, and also just starting to also kind of dictate a few things about what the light's going to be doing as far as the strength of the light, the depth of shadow, how deep I'm going with the shadows. I'm telling myself how bright I'm going to go with the light by going a certain depth in the shadow. Okay, and a little bit more shadow. I wanted to keep this shadow layer intact, and so I created a new layer and continued to experiment. You can see that things like this right here, where this is turning down, if you understand how light works, there's a bunch of light hitting the surface down here and bouncing back up, which means that there's more than just really the local light source. There's the light hitting the ground and bouncing up. And so instead of pushing this into a full deep shadow like I would if it was, let's say, fabric that doesn't react that much to light comparatively to metal, this would all just be a shadow. Had I done that with this, it would start to lose the feeling of being reflective. Because I've pushed the light into here and created reflections, it's telling your brain this is shiny, reflective material. Okay. So now I go into light, and you can see the brush, the texture that I'm using. You can see that I'm actually running with the form to create a feeling of kind of brushed metal. And instead of just randomly putting light here, I'm using the light and the shadow, I'm using the brush strokes to actually help inform the viewer of the form that they're seeing. Okay, so that's the first phase of light. Then we go into another phase of light where we continue to push what we already have, and now it's really starting to come together, starting to feel like gold for sure. But again, like I said, I want this to be handcrafted metal that feels like it might be on the table of a king and queen in the medieval times, kind of a thing, right? So metal dings, I want metal dings, I want texture, right? So I've got the overlay and multiply technique that I used over here on the cloak. Same exact technique, where I started with the shadow, I painted in the shadow, and then I duplicated it and turned it to overlay, and then just moved it down so it would be underneath the shadow and look like it's the part of the dings that it's catching light. Then another layer. Now we're all of these layers have been attached, by the way. I didn't want to do that. All of these layers so far that I've shown you have been attached to the main silhouette that I created. So I can paint and then nothing goes outside the lines. Now I want to go outside the lines. So with this one, I want this bit of a glow coming off here, right? I want to get that feeling of being outside the silhouette. I think this layer just needs to go away. There's nothing on it. And then finally at the very end I did a dodge, and the dodge adds that real like haloing really hard glow effect. You have to be careful with dodge because it can get out of control really fast. So anyways, so that's basically the process for all of these. Now let's go ahead and do a demo. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, turn the original one off, and now go through here and delete everything except for the original color. Okay. Now for the sake of time, I might not do a hyper detailed rendering, like I might not go into quite as much depth as I did on the original one that I just showed you. Okay, so let's talk about color. And in the case of this, I want this gold to feel very warm. And so as we go into shadow, I don't want to stay with my original color. I actually want to get warmer. So we're going to go down into the orange a little bit. I'm going to use a brush. If you watch any of my other videos, you probably are familiar with this by now. MA brush number 1-2. I really like this brush. Okay, so let's think about the form. Light is top down, that keeps it simple. So the first thing I see that's like a big form change is right here. And I know that I need to tell the viewer that this is turning away from the light. And also inform them of the perspective. The perspective is somewhere around here is the horizon. So that's going to be a straight line, and then from that horizon you're going to start to look down, which means you'll see smiley faces. And from that horizon you're going to start to look up, which means you're going to see frowny faces. That's how I think about that. So there's a lip right here as well. Go ahead and tell my viewer that there's a lip right there by turning the form with value, a darker value. Okay. These edges are turning away. Oh, also there's a little bit of fudging of light, where I'm saying it's top down, but it's actually top down that's slightly in front of it because I want to show off the front. You have to think about these things when you're working. Just like, yes, you want to be realistic. Well, let me rephrase that. If you're trying to be realistic, yes, you want to adhere to how light works in the real world. But the most important thing is actually selling what the viewer thinks they're looking at in the best possible way. And if that means that you fudge the light around a little bit to accomplish that goal, then so be it. Then you're doing the right thing, in my opinion. It's better to be a little bit loose with reality for the sake of artistic, making the viewer feel like they're seeing what's actually real. It's better to sacrifice reality to create an interesting piece, or to actually properly sell what the viewer thinks they're looking at. Okay, let's look at the next form. Now remember, this is in here, we're just around the horizon. So right around here, we're just going to kind of get a straight line. Straight lines-ish. Okay, let's turn this form away from the viewer. This form is turning up, but look, there's a big, huge form above this form that's stopping the light necessarily getting in here. But we did say we're going to push a little bit of light from the front. So that just gives us, if it wasn't for that, this whole thing would be in shadow. All this would be in shadow if the light was perfectly top down, which is exactly why we're avoiding doing that to ourselves, so that we can show more of these interesting forms in here. But right in here, there's a crease. So I'm going to go ahead and start to establish that light is not quite inside that crease the same. And then I'm going to leave this a little bit open because I already know I'm going to be kind of indicating that the reflected light down in there. Okay, now we're into the smiley face lines. So I need to make sure when I render, I'm rendering with that in mind. Okay. Okay, down here, we know that this is turned away from the light, so let's indicate that. Also, we know that we want the outside of this form to be turning away because it's round, it's wrapping. So let's start to establish that. Okay, also might as well just do the same treatment to these. Now we're going to be putting reflected light, rim light, on some of these edges, but we can do that in the light pass. We can establish the form turn for now. With our shadow. You can see here I actually already left a little bit of rim light, but that's because this form is so much bigger. It's quite easy to do that here while I'm zoomed out. Okay, so let's call that a fairly decent first pass. I think I'm going to just start to establish that I want to show that there's stuff in the room with this probably that is creating reflections on it. Like the chance that this is sitting in isolation is fairly slim, and that's how your brain actually like remembers these types of things that it's seen in the past. It remembers seeing them in the context that we usually see them. So if you can get away with just inventing like, oh yeah, there's another goblet over here, and that is creating a little reflection and also, core shadow into reflected light. So between using those kinds of concepts, understanding, you can kind of start to flesh out the little things that make metal feel shiny, or shiny things feel shiny, period, in general. Okay, let's go ahead and just... Oh, I did all that on the color layer. I didn't even create any layer. That's fine. Okay, creating a new layer. Let's name it Shadow. Okay, I'm going to go a little more towards red, a little warmer, and more saturated, and darker. And we're going to go ahead and start to reinforce our deepest areas of shadow. And the reason that I like to build up like this is because you get a lot more of a natural, at least in my opinion, you get a lot more of a natural kind of gradation of your darks. Instead of trying to get one shade of dark to kind of work for everything, you end up kind of having that variety that we really see in real life by building up multiple stages. Okay. Just gonna start to establish the depth of this turned form, but I do want to show, like, and this right here, this line, this secondary kind of thing happening, I don't actually know exactly where it's coming from. It could be coming from this line here reflecting up. It could be coming from something else. It's not necessarily important. What's important is understanding that this kind of level of reflectivity is happening. And so you just choose something from somewhere in your mind. It could be down here somewhere, just choose something and use it to create the look that you're trying to accomplish. And in this case, the look we're trying to accomplish is highly reflective material, which means that it needs to be showcasing reflections, which probably seems really obvious, but it's when you're actually working, it can be really hard to like figure out what to do. Like, how do I get this? Where am I pulling my reflections from? How do I make it reflective? What is there to reflect? Well, think about the surface, what it's facing, and imagine each surface. Put yourself in the perspective of the surface, and then what do you see? What's the POV of this piece right here? Well, it's looking outward and down. Okay. We're continuing to follow the shape, right, of the form with our brush. This brush has texture, and we don't want to miss out on all that great texture by just going like random lines, right? We're being very, very specific here about the direction of these lines following the shape. Okay, I'm gonna go a little deeper now. Also, as you get deep enough into the darks where the texture starts to dissipate, it does become less of a thing to like what I was just talking about. You can kind of reach a point of darkness and shadow where you stop. You just stop seeing the texture because the shadows are too dark. There's not enough light to showcase that texture. And at that point, you're just wasting your time if you try to do those kinds of, that kind of level of detail of the line work. You just get your dark in, just get it dark, basically. Okay, let's see, what's my time? Man, I've been going for almost half an hour on this video. I can't believe how fast these things go. I better hurry up and sort of move on here into the lights. I'm just gonna go one line darker now and just really start to show the full depth. Normally I would probably do this on another layer, but I think I need to like speed up my process here just a little bit for the sake of how long this video is going to be. Okay, let's get this laid in. Just thinking about a couple of those imperfections right here. That's creating this little breakup of light and shadow, right? If it was a perfect surface, that wouldn't happen, but it's not a perfect surface, and I'm telling the viewer that it's not exactly by doing that. Like, because I've done that, the viewer now knows that that's not a perfect surface. Otherwise, how could it possibly catch light in that way through there? Excuse me. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about reflected light here on this bottom surface. So I'm going to do like a core, kind of a core shadow right at the kind of peak of the ridge. better get into light here. Okay. So that's our shadow layer. Let's do a light layer here. Okay, for light, I want to go up into the kind of bright orange. I can't get too carried away how bright I go. This might be already too much, but this brush, thankfully this brush is very forgiving, the way that it builds up, which is why I'm using it for this job. So let's start to establish our light. We're going to get a little bit here because we're showing from the front a tiny bit, but we're going to get a lot more here because we're mostly from the top. So always thinking about the light source. Where is it coming from? Never stop thinking about that. That should always be informing every decision that you make. There's a little bit of a ridge here. I want to sell that by showing light catching. There's a ridge here. Sell that. This is round, so it's getting a hot spot where the light hits. I'll do a little bit of texture in here, where the metalsmith was pinging around with their hammer. Little dents and dings. Okay, blow this up. One thing I can do here, because I'm going so fast, is I can take my soft eraser to these edges and feather them back. So this lip is going to get reflective light because this is a bunch of light. So we're going to put reflected light in the lip and leave the core shadow in. Now let's get our soft eraser. So this is just a soft airbrush, right? And I'm just going to use this to clean up a little bit of what I did really fast, because I'm trying not to let this video get crazy long. Well, it's already gotten really long. We're at 33 minutes. Okay, let's do another light. We're going even brighter. Now I'm going to yellow it, right? Just like I went warmer, now that I'm going towards the light, which is a very white kind of sunlight, middle of the day type of sunlight. I'm going yellow towards white. Okay. Let's make sure we hit this up here. I definitely think that it's important when doing this to find the brushes that work for you. I will link these brushes that I'm using in the description of this video in case you want to. They're not my brushes. I bought them a couple of years. I started working on like some doing old master work, like doing pieces that were like studies of the old masters, and then like kind of creating my own works that were modeled in that kind of 17th century Dutch masters type of style. And I needed like really good painterly brushes that like really felt like they could do that kind of work. And so I found this set, and they're amazing. I mean, they're absolutely phenomenal, these brushes. Okay, let's see here. There's going to be a little bit of light, rim light, maybe a little bit of light out here, catching a little bit of light. This right here would actually catch light because it's just pushing out over the top of this. Like imagine, remember what I said before, imagine you're in the POV of any particular thing you're trying to render. Well, where would this thing looking out, what would it see? Well, it's sticking out farther than this part, and it's looking down at that, so that there's going to be bounce light in here. Ever so slightly. As this thing kind of starts to jut over the top. I'm going to go ahead and change my angle here. I'm tired of looking at that sideways. It's easier. Some of these brush strokes are just easier for me at an angle, and I highly suggest that you find your own comfortable angles for certain things. Like doing all of these brush strokes at this exact same kind of angle following the contour of this, I wouldn't be comfortable doing that at the normal, like this, like sideways. Like I'm more comfortable top down. That's kind of my comfortable zone. So, you know, learn that about yourself. I'm actually just blending layers now for the sake of time. I'm just doing everything on one layer. It's fine. That's how I normally work anyways, most of the time. It's just I wanted the extra layers to do breakdowns for you guys so you could see kind of the stages, because I do think about this stuff in stages, but a lot of times I'll keep to the same layer because it's just so much faster. Switching layers all the time is a huge hassle. Huge hassle. And I think it's great to use a bunch of layers when you're trying to get confident, but at the same time, somewhere along the way, you got to break that seal and say, I am good enough. I can paint my way out of anything. I don't need a layer. If I make a mistake, I'll paint my way out of it. And having that mindset, that mentality, you'll start to notice that because you're backing yourself, you'll start to notice that you didn't need those layers all along. You were just living on a crutch that didn't really need to exist. Granted, I do use layers quite a bit in my client work because if they want to change something, I have to be prepared to make that change. And I've learned over the years that when you have everything on one layer and they ask you to make changes, it's an absolute nightmare. So admittedly, with my client work, I do tend to keep my layers separate. Okay, just pushing my deepest darks here in anticipation of pushing my brightest brights, because I want them to feel merited, and they won't feel merited if we don't have dark enough darks. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, the darkness of the shadow is comparative to the brightness of the light. Without a super bright light, you will not get a super dark shadow in object rendering. I mean, that might not necessarily be true 100% of the time, so don't go off quoting me on that. But for, as a basic simple rule, if you want it to look like your bright brights have a reason to exist, you need dark darks. Or if you want it to look like your dark darks have a reason to exist, actually, more realistically. Okay, just doing like a little extra, little extra bits here. The little things that kind of start to flesh out that final look that we want. Okay. Okay, I'm going to create a layer that's not attached now. Not attached to our original mask. I'm setting this, or I'm going all the way to white. All the way to white, and now we're going to paint our hot spots. Okay, we've got light hitting there. A little bit right here. Right here. There's some dinged textures right here, so let's make sure we break our highlight up a little bit. Let's do that for this one as well, actually. Okay, let's hit this pretty hard right here. It's a nice sharp form turn right there, so we really want to show that that's lipping, like this is almost perpendicular to the light, and light that hits perpendicular to an object is always brightest. As the object it's hitting turns parallel with it, it gets darker and darker and darker until it actually doesn't strike that object whatsoever. So this lip turns out so hard it becomes almost the same plane as the ground, and it's top-down light, so we know this needs to get hit pretty hard right there. Let's go ahead and hit these edges as well. Need to be careful because I'm not actually on the mask, so I'm painting onto the background. You can see a little bit there, but I'll let just a little bit of that slide. Just going and finding little things I want to hit for the sake of nuance. This is like reflected light from the ground, just finding its way up into there. Okay, and last but not least, we're going to do our dodge. That's color dodge, in case you've never used it for some reason. In layer modes, color dodge. And I want the sheen off of this to be bright. I want it to feel bright, and what that means is I actually want some darkness around the brightness to help showcase it, but it needs to be high saturation. And since the metal is warm, I'm going to use like a warm, kind of warm orange, but I'm not going to go too saturated because color dodge adds saturation, so somewhere in here. And I'm going to change my brush. For the first time in this demo, I'm actually going to use an airbrush to paint. I don't do this very often, but for this particular case, for this particular use, it's actually the perfect brush, and that is to just paint glow, right? So you can kind of push this to taste and just go to all your hot spots, hit them with the dodge, and probably for the sake of time, we're almost at an hour now. I don't know if I'm going to demo the texture, the dings and dents and whatnot. eraser. Anyways, yeah, I think the dings and dents are, I mean, as important as they are in like a final version of a very specific style where I'm going for something that looks old and fatigued, it's not really that important for this. Like, this feels like gold, right? This is gold. So we've accomplished the goal of demoing how to render gold. It's the exact same mentality and techniques in the other two, and all the materials that you ever render. Always ask yourself these questions. Is it hard or soft? Where's the light coming from, and how strong is the light? And how much is that going to showcase the fine details of this material? And then, is it reflective? Is it not reflective? And then look at reference and just build up your visual library. Do some studies, you know, go and find real things around your house and put them in the exact same light and take pictures of them and build a reference of a light setup, right? Instead of worrying about what the objects are, be thinking about what the light source was. And every object you put in that light source and take a picture of it is going to help you to start to understand how different materials behave under the same light source. Because if you render 4 different materials in the same piece that are interacting with light in different ways, they're not going to look like they're coexisting in that lighting setup. And I see that a lot of times in amateur and even intermediate paintings. So think about that. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please give it a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.